Welcome to Travel for Curious Minds, brought to you by Jules Verne. I'm Debbie, the Managing Director at Jules Verne. I'm really excited about this podcast. In each episode, we bring to you an amazing guest with some incredible stories inspiring you to travel the globe and unleash your curiosity for travel. So now, let's go over to your host, Abbey, and meet this episode's guest.
I am thrilled to be sitting opposite Charlie Mayhew, OBE, and founder and president of Tusk. Just hello, Charlie. Amazing to see you.
Hello. It's great to meet you, Abbey.
I'm really excited for this conversation because I think we'll actually really be able to learn something as well as travel around sort of the world, but mostly Africa, which is somewhere that is so close to my heart. So I'm really excited to sort of pick your brains, get all your knowledge, and just hear your amazing stories from life, really. So first of all, can you just give us a little bit about Tusk and sort of how you came to create this amazing conservation organisation?
Thanks, Abbey. Well, Tusk is a British-based African wildlife conservation charity that, for my sins, I set up back in 1990, really at the height of the poaching crisis, when we were losing something like 100,000 elephants a year to the ivory trade. So that was the stimulus for it. But the charity has got a very, very broad and diverse reach, where we're funding all sorts of species, anything from turtle conservation to gorilla conservation. But at the heart of our ethos and our approach to conservation has always been the recognition that we need to engage communities, and we need the people that live alongside wildlife to benefit and to be able to use conservation as a way to improve their livelihoods. So it's a very, very broad-based and holistic approach to conservation across Africa.
And when you started back in 1990, how did you go about changing the mindset of locals? When actually sometimes, wrongly, people can see wildlife, especially elephants, as troublesome or a nuisance. They go to farms, they take crops. How did you start that conversation 33 years ago now?
So I think the first thing to say is that the model that we have developed has been not for Tusk to parachute our own teams onto the ground, dictating, the way things should be done. Instead, what we look for is to try and identify the best possible partners and practitioners, the experts themselves who live and work in these areas, and to invest in their ability and capabilities to deliver conservation. So as a result, we have a broad portfolio of project partners working across Africa. I mean, going back to the 1990s, at that point, because poaching and the illegal wildlife trade was just such an appalling epidemic in a way, not only for elephants but also for rhino and other species were being impacted as well. So in those days, in many ways, there was a sort of a fortress approach to conservation. But what we've found is over the last 30 odd years that increasingly people have recognized the value and the importance of community-driven, community-managed, community-owned conservation. Your own country, Zimbabwe, has been one of the leaders in community conservation. So that's been very much an approach that Tusk has adopted really from the early 90s, so that as I say, wanting to make sure that we're not trying to dictate conservation from the developed world or from the Western world, as it were. It's very much looking at what works within these countries, and there is you touch on the challenge of human-wildlife conflict, living with elephants, living with predators, lions, for instance, can be incredibly difficult for rural communities and farmers, whether they be, growing maize, and they could lose a crop of maize overnight to a herd of elephants. So the challenge of human-wildlife conflict has really become one of the sort of preeminent issues of today, and perhaps even less so than poaching in some respects.
It's such amazing work that you founded and you're doing, but not just in Africa. There's other areas that you're sort of touching and working with. So what have you done sort of maybe over the last 5 to 10 years that has been different from when you started in Africa?
The early years of Tusk, we were preoccupied really by the poaching crisis and the illegal wildlife trade, and the fact that elephant and rhino, and now actually, the great sadness is the impact on lion populations. I don't think most people have woken up to the fact that, for instance, the lion, the African lion, the king of the jungle, is now rarer than the rhino. There are less than 20,000 lion left in the wild today across Africa. They've been lost from all but, perhaps 10% of their historic range across the continent. Now, that's been as a result of a number of factors, but not least of all, the growing human footprint across Africa, which has basically meant that we're losing habitat at a devastating rate, and species like lion are really suffering as a result of that. But what has been exacerbating that has been a growing trade in lion parts for parts of the Far East, possibly as a result of the fact that they haven't been able to get a hold of tiger parts, which has long been held as a desirable. I don't personally understand it, but so we've seen a shift over the years in terms of some of the conservation challenges, but loss of habitat and connected landscapes. So the big migratory species like elephant have still got enough landscape in which to exist. So all of these are the issues that we've been wrestling with.
And talking about you a little bit more personally, what initially inspired you to start traveling, to head to Africa and get involved? What was that initial spark where you thought, I want to be an adventurer, I want to try different things?
Well, I was lucky as a child. I grew up with an uncle and aunt who lived in Africa. When they used to come home to the UK, there were all these amazing stories, which really sort of inspired me to want to go and explore Africa. And so my first opportunity when I left school to take a gap year, led me to working in South Africa originally, but nothing specifically linked to wildlife conservation at all, but it was an opportunity for me to see a little bit of that country, very, very beautiful country, and get out at the weekends when I wasn't working into places like the Kruger National Park. And so it sort of whetted my appetite to see more of the continent. I think I was very aware that South Africa isn't what I call the real Africa. And so, I then returned to the UK and started working in the city of London. But after about 4 years, I was just itching to explore the continent. And I managed, thankfully, to persuade the chairman of the company I was working for to sponsor me to take an expedition where I put together a team of 33 young people drawn over from all across Europe. It was a complete blind date. And we drove over 7 months from London to Cape Town. Down across the Sahara, through parts of Central Africa into the Congo, and then across to East Africa and down. And in order to try and justify that expedition, and so that it wasn't seen as a pure jolly by a whole lot of young people, which is sort of what it was, is we took on various projects and tasks, and one of which was to help put up a perimeter fence at Lake Nakuru National Park in Kenya, so that they could introduce the black rhino as part of their program to protect and establish new populations of black rhino in Kenya. And that was really the moment, this was in the mid-'80s, and that was really the moment where I became sort of aware of the issues and the challenges that were facing conservation, and sort of thinking, well, I'd like to see if I can do something to help. And that ultimately then led to Tusk being established back in 1990.
What an amazing journey as well. What was the inspiration behind taking that group and driving, all of that distance? And also, this is back in sort of 1985, if I'm right. This is not, an easy thing to plan. This is not, you can pop online and sort out your Google Maps route. How did you come up with this amazing idea? But also, how did you persuade people that let's do this adventure, but we will be safe, but we will be going through parts of Africa that, like you say, different to Cape Town, true African countries? How did you just come up with this amazing concept?
Well, naivety is and ignorance is bliss, isn't it? So I was 24 at the time when I came up with or 23, I think, when I came up with the idea. It took me about a year to plan it. There was no shortage of people wanting to join. I had over 1,000 applicants from across Europe, and I knew I needed to put together a team with a certain skill set, or at least I needed to have a certain number of mechanics. I wanted a medical team on, with us, a really good photographer and things like that. So once I'd filled those slots, then we opened it up a little bit more, just to young people aged between 20 and 25. And we were beautifully naive about really the challenges and the that we were going to face. And we for instance, driving through the Congo, the Zaire as it was in those days, now the DRC. The roads were non-existent going through the tropical rainforest and jungle. We would average about 20 miles in a whole day of driving, and it was tough. It was very hot, but we had the most amazing trip, and it's formed my life ever since. And so I'm forever grateful for it.
Well, it's obviously changed you as a person, but also, like you said, it's changed your life. Everything you've achieved from that moment and from those experiences and meeting those people is just incredible. I mean, how many countries do you think you have visited? Have you ever counted, or have you sat down and thought, right, this is how many I've done?
God, no, I don't think I have ever counted. But in Africa, it must be over 20, 24, 25 countries, I should think, that I've been lucky enough to go to. The Tusk portfolio that we have today covers, at least 24 countries. I've been very, very lucky to have visited and traveled through a lot of them. And then outside Africa, I was very greedy. I took a second gap year and worked my passage on a chemical tanker ship to Australia. So I crossed the Atlantic and went through the Caribbean, the Panama Canal, and then out the other side across the Pacific, visited Pitcairn Island, of all places, in the middle of the Pacific, and then on to New Zealand and Australia. So, that in itself was quite an adventure, that trip. So, I've been very lucky in that respect.
And obviously, we both have a love for Africa, and I don't want that to dominate. But are there any countries that have really sort of captured your heart and stand out to you as places that may have surprised you, or destinations where people have surprised you?
Well, I obviously have a very deep passion for Africa, but anybody who's travelled through the continent will know, one, how vast it is, and two, how varied it is. I mean, from East Africa, I've always got a very strong affinity and love of Kenya. We have a significant footprint of projects that we fund there. I love Kenya because of the diversity of its landscape, the richness of its wildlife, and the fact that you've also got a beautiful coastline as well. But equally, Namibia, I find fascinating. It's like landing on Mars when you go up into the area of Kunene and the Skeleton Coast. It's just so staggeringly beautiful, but just so different from East Africa. The Okavango Delta in Botswana, another incredibly beautiful part of the world. But not that I'd suggest people travel there, and it's quite difficult to go there now and a bit dangerous, is the DRC. I mean, the jungles of the DRC are pretty cool. But outside Africa, I not long ago went to Transylvania in Romania on a walking and cycling trip, and I have to say I was just blown away by its beauty, and it's very difficult to pick out one place. I think I'm not, here in Europe. I've always been very fond of Italy. I love Tuscany and Umbria and places like that.
Have you ever found that you have been in a situation where things haven't necessarily gone right for you in your travels, whether it's been a group or independently? And sort of sometimes these are the best stories, but what has happened to you? Have you got any of those stories?
Yeah, too many actually. I mean, on that expedition, well, we had a vehicle breakdown in the middle of the Sahara, and it took us, I think, something like 2-3 weeks before we got the right spare part delivered out to us. So that was a bit of a challenge. But then we traveled on down into Niger, and we were in sort of very remote bit of Sahel where, unfortunately, one of the drivers, we had 8 vehicles in the convoy, and one of the drivers fell asleep at the wheel and rolled the vehicle with 5 people inside, including the team doctor, who ironically was the worst injured. Apart from the fact that we had to then find a way of airlifting him out of this area, so that because he very nearly lost his leg. I'm pleased to say we did save him, and that was fine. But actually, we then had the challenge of trying to rebuild the vehicle in the middle of effectively desert. But the mechanical team were amazing. They managed to sort of create a sort of Heath Robinson with sort of ropes and using the odd tree to help pivot and stretch bits of metal and bend the vehicle back into some sort of shape so that we could keep on going. And that vehicle did make its way all the way back down to Cape Town, even though it was slightly crabbing down the road every day. But we had that problem. I was arrested in Zaire by what turned out very quickly to be a group of corrupt border guards who just saw an opportunity to try and extort some money from us. But we had to go through the charade of them setting up a kangaroo court in the jungle before they decided on what fine they were going to slap on me. There's lots of opportunities, lots of things. I've been charged by rhino on foot, all sorts of things.
You do seem to have a very good sense of humour about these sort of things when they go wrong, though. What would you say now when you're planning trips, whether it's with Tusk or, whether it's on your own trips? What do you do? What sort of advice would you give to people to have conservation in mind, but also ensure that they're, really getting under the skin of a destination, meeting the locals? What is your best advice? How do you plan your trips?
Yeah, maintaining a sense of humour throughout is really important. I always feel that, we live in such a sort of hectic society, a busy world, that when you are planning these sort of trips, particularly to really interesting places, don't try and pack your day out with so many things that you don't give yourself time to really get under the skin of the country. And as you say, give yourself time to try and meet, local people and if they're indigenous tribes or whatever. But just try and give yourself time and don't get stressed. Particularly in Africa, it just doesn't work. We always joke about, being on Africa time because there's a pace of life that I think we could all learn from, to be honest with you, that it's important to allow yourself that pace.
And to be able to just immerse yourself, I think that's the biggest thing, especially with us and, being a group tour provider, we use those local guides. So if things go wrong, it's fine. They deal with it for you. If you're a little bit late, it's fine. They deal with it. But you can sort of just take the time to really immerse yourself and soak in your atmosphere. And I think you're right. Having a sense of humour is just one of the best things that you can pack in your suitcase with you.
Yeah, I mean, actually, fun enough, during the expedition, one of the things that we found was because we were quite a big convoy with a lot of kit, that going through border posts, it would could take the whole day. And some people on the team used to get incredibly frustrated. They just couldn't understand why we couldn't just clear customs like you do in Europe. But others on the team, I thought, were pretty good because they would just sit down with a pack of cards and start playing a game of cards while they just had to wait for the process to go through. And I think that was quite a good example to set as to how you just have to go with the flow sometimes.
And I think ultimately, especially with Africa, everybody just ends up smiling. And that's the biggest thing. Just go in with a smile on your face and you'll be absolutely fine.
It's a brilliant continent. I've always felt, for no particular reason, but I just feel like I'm coming home when I land on African soil. There's and it gets in your blood as a continent, and you just can't help going back.
So talking a little bit more about you again, kind of bringing it back to you, you were awarded your OBE by His Majesty the King, but that's not the only royal connection that you have through Tusk, is it? His Royal Highness Prince William, Prince of Wales, has done a lot of work with you about conservation. So how did that all come about? And how did you get these amazing ambassadors, Bear Grylls, Zoe Ball, Ruby Wax, these amazing people?
Yes, we've been very fortunate. With Prince William, I don't know if you were aware, but he did spend part of his own gap year in Africa, and by chance that happened to be at the Lewa Wildlife Conservancy, which was a conservancy that Tusk was already supporting at the time that he went out there. So he became aware of Tusk. And obviously he was, I think he was, 18 years old when he was then. And I had a call out of the blue back in 2003 from the then Prince of Wales, Prince Charles's polo manager, saying that Prince William and Prince Harry had both agreed to take part in a polo match, a charity polo match, and wondered whether we'd like to be a beneficiary. So the obvious answer to that was yes. And so that's when I met him for the first time. Then we were lucky enough in 2005 that he selected us as one of his first two charities alongside Centrepoint, which was one of Princess Diana's charities, a homeless charity. We were selected as the first two to receive his patronage. And, where we've been so fortunate is that William has a passion for Africa, and he's incredibly knowledgeable about the continent, its people, and its wildlife. And he takes a very deep interest in the work that we do. So, for the last nearly 20 years, he has been proactively supporting the work of the charity. And we've travelled together, not only in Africa, but also I've been fortunate enough to be invited to join him on trips to China and Vietnam, for instance, when he's been beating the drum about the illegal wildlife trade. So yeah, we've been very, very lucky to have his support.
And incredibly lucky that this relationship has formed between the two of you so organically that actually, he really does have that passion and that interest and that drive to support you and everything you're doing at Tusk. And I think that is wonderful. I have to ask you, how did it feel to get an OBE? I just can't imagine what, do you get a call, a letter? Tell me everything.
Comes out of the blue is the answer. So I received a letter. I'd actually been fortunate enough to receive an MBE back in 2005 from Her Majesty the Queen, the late Queen, and then was even more surprised to then receive the note saying that I'd been considered for an OBE, and basically you're asked if you would accept it. So I can't imagine why you'd say no, but anyway, so that was great. And actually, the OBE was given to me by Prince William, as opposed to it was awarded by the King, but it was actually handed to me by Prince William. So that was actually very, very special.
A really special moment. It must have been, an incredible connection that you have anyway, but just having that recognition and that moment between the two of you, I can't imagine. I have so many questions, but I will move on. So when we're thinking about sort of our clientele and our listeners here at Jules Verne, what would you say is your advice to ensure that, we really have conservation at the front of our minds when we're planning a trip, planning a holiday, or even for us when we're planning our tours? We pride ourselves in looking after the environment, looking after the communities there. So what can we all do to just really have conservation at the front of our minds?
I think it's so important. I think we're all aware that, the environment and our planet is really suffering. I mean, in fact, in the last 50 years, the Living Planet report has identified something like 68% of all mammals, birds, and fish have been declining at an alarming rate. And so, if you take a continent like Africa, Africa now hosts 25% of the world's remaining biodiversity. It's absolutely crucial for our own survival, let alone in anything else, that we look after the natural world. I mean, every breath of air we take and every mouthful of food and water, all comes from the natural world. So we need to be increasingly conscious of our own footprint, on this planet. Now that I'm a great believer in travel. I think that it opens our eyes up to obviously other cultures and parts of the world, and it's incredibly important. And what I see in Africa is how travel and tourism can be a huge benefit to those economies and to those people, but it has to be done in a responsible way. And it behoves us to ensure that we travel with companies and we go to lodges and camps and hotels that abide by those sort of standards. Small things like when you go into a marketplace, just do not get tempted into buying anything that could be remotely linked to the illegal wildlife trade or the illegal trade in woods that are used for carving or whatever. So, we can play our own part in this, and just always keep in mind, our own footprint, when we're traveling.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And it's such, it's such clear and concise advice. We really do need to all take a moment to just step back and realize the impact that we all have and the positivity that we can all bring to to wildlife, to the world, to everything really. Just sort of then ending this conversation, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I could keep chatting to you for ages, but I appreciate that you're a very busy gentleman. But where's next for you? Where's the next trip? You've just come back from the States, but where are you heading off to next? What's on the list?
Yes, I have. I've just been on a fundraising trip to the east coast of the States, which seemed to be pretty successful. So that was good. I've actually just been invited by the Rwandan government to come to an annual ceremony they do, which is to name their mountain gorillas. So I'll be going out there in October, visiting the mountain gorillas, which is, for anybody who hasn't done it, it is a real must. It's an extraordinary experience to spend time with a gorilla family. They are so human. It's uncanny. And it's just one of the great experiences that one can have with wildlife. So I always highly recommend that. So I'm looking forward to that. A little bit later in the autumn, I'll be actually going down to Cape Town for Prince William's Earthshot Prize, when he's also going to be hosting a United for Wildlife summit, which is important. And straight after that, I head back up to Kenya, when, believe it or not, we are, with the support of DHL, one of our corporate partners, we are flying 25 very rare mountain bongo and antelope species from a breeding sanctuary in Florida back to their sort of indigenous lands on the foothills of Mount Kenya. So that's going to be quite a fun exercise.
Gosh, wow, you've got so much planned. I mean, I dare to ask, is there anywhere that you haven't been yet that is on your list that you want to travel to and experience?
Oh yes, plenty of places. I'd love to go to the Amazon. I went to Colombia earlier this year. I managed to get out of Africa and go to Colombia, which was beautiful. Loved traveling around Colombia. But I didn't get down to the Amazon, which I'd love to do. There are parts of the States, the Rockies, Montana, those sort of places that I would love to explore. And oh gosh, the list is endless.
That's the best way to be, though. Have an endless list of destinations and experiences that you want to go to. It's wonderful to hear. Charlie, thank you so much for your time today. I have loved talking to you. I've loved talking about Africa, which, you can tell you are just so passionate and the most amazing brand ambassador for conservation. And thank you for everything that you have done since, you started Tusk, and everything you're going to do in the future. You are a true inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Abbey.
I really hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I did. We'd love to hear what you think, so please leave us a review on Apple or wherever you get your podcast. Or you can head over to our Facebook or Instagram accounts or our website, vjv.com. And don't forget, our episodes alternate between full-length conversations and short, sharp chats. So to make sure you don't miss out, subscribe now to get those episodes in your inbox as soon as they launch.